Did the two of you abuse your son?
No.
But I'm so sorry.
What do you do when there are no witnesses? When the child injured is a baby, an infant who can't tell us what happened?
We're barely making it.
We did nothing to hide anything.
There's no winning for these parents.
You're about to hear from 10 Georgia families who took their children to the hospital for help with unexplained medical injuries. They left without them, accused of abuse.
We asked for second opinions. They come back with that test isn't needed.
I no longer thought that I was worthy of my children.
It makes sense that child welfare got involved, but it is what happens next that is raising concerns and has Georgia families begging lawmakers to get involved. Baby bottles, a crib, and toys. It is a house frozen in time. This father's two girls are gone.
What's it like to go to sleep in this house?
It's lonely.
Not even Matt Hernandez's wife, Tucky, is living here. In fact, these parents haven't been together with their children in nearly 10 months.
Why?
Our bond conditions don't allow us to have contact with each other.
Bond conditions, as in criminal charges, and not just against him, against his wife as well.
2 counts of first-degree child abuse and 2 counts of aggravated assault.
That's why even though his 4-year-old daughter Aria loves to spin and twirl as he plays guitar, the dance floor today is empty.
You know, we love these girls so much.
You want Mom, you want my mom, you want my mom.
And the state has just, from day one, seemed to be set on ripping us apart.
It started when Tucky noticed Emma had a swollen leg. They took her to their pediatrician, who referred them to Children's Healthcare of Atlanta.
We did nothing to hide anything.
It was there they also showed doctors a picture of a reddish spot found earlier behind the newborn's ear. They answered questions without hesitation, unaware they were talking to a child abuse pediatrician, or CAP, who already suspected abuse after seeing Emma's x-rays.
It was some healed ribs and some fractures on her femur and tibia.
Fractures that, to the CAP, could only mean abuse. A parent who has abused their child isn't likely to admit it. But what's interesting is that Emma's injuries didn't magically stop when her parents lost custody. First, she went to live with her aunt and uncle.
About 5 weeks in, we woke her up one morning and she had the strange bruising, discoloration on her feet and one of her ankles.
DFACS accused them of letting the mother, Tucky, sneak over to again abuse the baby.
No, we completely have been doing everything by the book.
Still, the girls were removed, but the marks kept showing up in her foster home and daycare. Jonathan and Jennifer Williams started raising their own questions about Emma's health when DFACS asked them to watch the girls for a few days.
So I was concerned about some of the physical things of Emma, just how she held herself, her little skull seemed kind of sunken into me.
They told the juvenile court judge they believed Emma had an undiagnosed health problem and were shocked by the testimony defending DFACS's decision to instead put the girls in state custody for abuse.
I saw nothing presented as evidence that indicated this family had hurt their child at all.
They were treating this family like they were criminals. They were treating them with zero respect.
The state no longer uses the Williams to care for foster children. Almost a year later, Emma's new caregiver says something is still not right.
Because she's under DFACS's care, she's under Medicaid, so we kind of have to follow these guidelines. But I'm like, can I take her to, a different doctor myself? I'll pay for it. Like, we need to figure this out because it's bothering me. Because I want to be able to fix whatever's going on in her situation.
Court records show no one disputes the x-rays reveal injuries to Emma's bones, that Tucky's vitamin D levels were low during pregnancy, or that Emma's levels were low when she came into the hospital. But doctors do disagree on the cause of those fractures and the impact of that vitamin D deficiency.
It seems like entire cases hinge on just one child abuse pediatrician saying this is abuse. And his word, that is just opinion sometimes, doesn't even have hard evidence, is enough to carry it all the way through prosecution.
Doctors have figured out why she gets those bruise-like marks, and it has nothing to do with abuse. Emma's parents want genetic testing to rule out any other illnesses that could have weakened her bones.
You offered to pay for it.
Offered to pay for it.
6 months after the girls were removed, the court agreed to the testing, but it is a process that can take months. Meanwhile, this family functions in fragments. Each week, a few hours. Supervised visits, first with mom and later with dad.
To keep my wife and I, who have been married since 2012, separated for so long is just cruel. To know that they're tormenting a 4-year-old child and just to continue to push through it is just cruel.
Let's take out the emotion and just deal with the facts. This is Casey and Bailey Collins and their son, Ridge. She is an advanced EMT, so she knows what to do in an emergency. Still,
You're not prepared and trained to use life-saving skills on your child.
August 2023, Ridge stopped breathing and he was life-flighted to Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. It was there that a child abuse pediatrician determined someone had violently shaken him, causing his brain to bleed. His father, Casey, was the prime suspect.
You cried.
I did.
He immediately cried. He lost it.
They can point at me and say he had to have done it. It's just kind of heart-wrenching to hear, especially on the stand when you're in court.
Georgia's Department of Family and Children's Services removed custody, and the parents were arrested.
I just remember holding Ridge and telling him that I was so sorry, that I wished I could take him with me, and I had no choice but to leave him.
All right, I know we said no emotion, but Bailey's heartache is also fact. Even in foster care, Ridge returned to the ER months later with another mysterious brain bleed and head swelling. This is Ridge's normal pediatrician, Dr. Jill Dickerson.
I've done this for 25 years. We've had kids that were shaken.
She understands why Ridge's injuries raised red flags, but says his medical history went ignored. Ridge was born premature with an abnormally large head, ringed by a strange bruise. Did they ever ask to see Ridge's records from his time with you before making their decision?
They never called us. Defects never called us. There wasn't a lot of listening, and there certainly wasn't a lot of compassion. And I can say that from the notes, because I read every single note.
Dickerson says it was like doctors declared abuse, deemed him now safe, and then stopped running tests.
It's almost like we had an answer that fit. So why would we keep looking? Let's move on.
Bailey says she had to take a video of Ridge having a seizure while in the hospital.
Come on, Reggie boy.
For them to believe something else was going wrong. You have been practicing law for how long now?
23 years.
Attorney Doris Good remembers the first time she had to defend a case like the Collins.
I felt like everyone else does in many ways that, well, it's Children's Hospital. It's child abuse pediatricians. Of course, they know what they're talking about.
But a colleague reviewing medical reports started raising questions, and they both started digging into exactly what the science could prove.
What I do think is it doesn't necessarily come down to the fact that they're wrong. It's the fact that they're insufficient. So they're consistently relying upon the same people, the same records. They're not relying on a lot of these specialists who have had years in their fields.
Even if they do, 11 Alive has evidence that some specialists don't feel comfortable pushing back against a diagnosis of abuse. Good says some parents even have to fight defects for access to their child. just to get that independent second medical opinion.
Science evolves. And I think that's part of the problem, is that this area of law has not, and really of science, has not evolved. It's stayed stagnant.
You know, I can't have access to what's happening in the juvenile system, but one of these indictments where a parent actually ended up facing criminal charges, and the list, of doctors,
correct,
from CHOA is just, it's pages.
We see these crazy lists, and we see how many, every single child abuse doctor at the Children's Hospital is on this, even though only one actually did the report.
This is just huge. I could see why,
correct,
if I'm looking at this list, I would think, well, how could they be wrong?
Correct. So you have the power of the state. This is powerful and frightening for a lot of attorneys that take these cases, myself included.
And you'll put up one, maybe two.
Correct.
I think there is this perception, though, that if a doctor is willing to take a look at a case, then they're probably more likely to say what you want to hear.
I think that's a false perception.
In April, a juvenile court judge ruled in the Collins case that defects had failed to prove its case. But the pending criminal charges mean Ridge still can't come home. District Attorney Herb Cranford has yet to say what he'll do. But in Georgia, he can take up to 7 years to figure it out. Their bond conditions allow them to spend time with their son, but only supervised. So Bailey and Ridge live with her parents, while Casey maintains their home.
It's just lonely, sad. It's been hard.
We pray every day. We tell ourselves, maybe today will be the day. Maybe today will be the day.
Dr. Dickerson gets reports from all of the specialists Ridge now sees. She says none of them point to abuse in her professional opinion.
No. The more data we got, it's like, that doesn't make sense.
Right now, Dickerson believes Ridge has a blood disorder that keeps it from clotting the way it is supposed to, especially after being exposed to a viral infection.
His immune system overshoots one way and then it overshoots the other way.
She doesn't understand why the state is keeping the Collins apart.
If defects is to protect the child, the best place for the child, especially in this case, is with his family at home. Can we let's be done and let's move on.
Attorney Therese Good says thankfully most of the families she represents do eventually reunite. But it's an expensive fight. The Collins have already spent more than $100,000.
What I'm terrified about is these cases where attorneys don't have the knowledge, don't have the resources. They're appointed cases. They're families who don't have the knowledge and resources. I wonder how many of those kids don't go home. And that, if anything, is what keeps me up at night.
He's really sweet.
The playroom at the Lester's house is packed with toys, patience, and lots of love.
I couldn't turn my back on these babies. They were innocent. I love these babies so much.
Just as she loved her babies before them.
I love these pictures. We are looking at my kids. This is the family as years were going by and they were getting older.
Old enough that Tracy and her husband Johnny started thinking about retirement.
We were finally at the point where we didn't have to hire a babysitter and we could leave the youngest one here.
But then her daughter,
Carolyn,
started her own family.
Come here, let's read, Parker.
2 boys born.
You may start the conversation now.
Hello? Before she went to prison. What prison are you in again?
I'm at Lee Arundel.
3 years ago, Carolyn and her husband, Tyler Alexander, were accused of abusing their firstborn, Parker, who at the time was only 8 weeks old. 6 months later, Tracy and her husband got custody to get the boys out of foster care. Did the two of you abuse your son?
No.
The couple believed so strongly they'd reunify that as the jury deliberated, They were child-proofing their boy's bedroom. After all, they left as infants, but could return toddlers. For too long, their home sat on a street, failing to live up to its name.
As to count 5, as charged in the indictment, cruelty to children in the first degree.
That joy would have to wait a little longer.
We, the jury, found the defendant guilty.
No one disputes Parker had several broken and fractured bones, but his parents insist they never treated him aggressively. They believe their son suffered from a complex series of medical events that unknowingly left him with weaker bones.
And then it was just like my heart shattered. I really just don't know what to say anymore. The jury definitely got it wrong.
There are parents guilty of horrendous crimes. In 2023, Georgia fielded more than 60,000 safety concerns. According to child welfare data, a very small number of those children, 418, involved allegations of physical abuse. Last year's data doesn't break cases down by age, but in previous years, about 18% of those would be infants, children who had yet to celebrate their first birthday.
Physical abuse is fortunately not very common. Neglect is the biggest issue we deal with.
Attorney Tom Rawlings once served as the director of Georgia's Division of Family and Children's Services, or DFACS. He has run the state's Child Advocacy Office, and he has served as a juvenile court judge. He has seen the challenges of identifying and stopping abuse from more angles than most, and he is grateful our state has 5 child abuse pediatricians working at area hospitals to help.
They really are a wonderful first line of defense to make sure that children who have been abused are receiving proper safety and are getting cared for.
It is a child abuse pediatrician, or CAP, that diagnosed each of the babies at the center of our investigation, Help That Harms. Rawlings says as an attorney, he has also represented parents he believes are innocent.
And so to me, the question is not dismissing the great work of child abuse pediatricians, but it is to make sure that parents, when they say, well, I haven't done anything, that we're listening to them and we are giving them the opportunity to defend themselves.
CAPs undergo special training to identify abuse, so their diagnoses wield a lot of power. We heard it echoed in the Alexander trial.
Once they make their recommendation and once they make their finding, you pretty much just go along with what they say.
Correct. It's considered the top of the line.
But CAPs aren't just diagnosing the medical problem, they are declaring how the child got it. Abuse. Families who deny the allegation argue child abuse pediatricians are making decisions based off a snapshot in time, when to really understand the injury, a doctor needs to look at the whole picture, birth records, and previous medical appointments. But once the CAP suspects abuse, everyone else from doctors and DFACS to law enforcement views the case through that lens.
Agencies, individuals, we all have a bit of confirmation bias.
Tracy says 2 of Parker's fractures are a perfect example. Radiologists identified them after he went into foster care. The CAP said they must have missed them the first time around. But Parker's parents see the fractures as new, unexplained injuries while out of custody.
I do believe that sometimes what is missing for the parents is the ability to have that second opinion from an independent person, because the decision we're making legally is so significant.
Okay, so do it. Get a second opinion. Even CAPs don't seem to understand that right now, that's just not how Georgia's process works.
Once your team gets involved and y'all have made a diagnosis of child abuse or suspected child abuse, how much the parents are not really allowed to ask for a second opinion, are they?
No, they're free to ask for a second opinion. Unless their parental rights have been terminated, I don't believe that there's anything preventing them from getting a second opinion.
Terilyn and Tyler couldn't do that because their child had been taken from them. They weren't allowed to take them to doctors or be at any doctor's appointments. We asked for second opinions. And they come back with, that's not needed, that test isn't needed,
Tracy didn't get custody until Parker was 8 months old. It was only then that she was able to get more testing. But she says most doctors looked at Parker's medical chart from Children's and sent them home.
They do not want to go outside what that child abuse pediatrician said. They don't want to ruffle feathers. They don't want to get involved.
She did eventually learn Parker had a missing chromosome, and a doctor in Boston told the family it is likely Parker had Ehlers-Danlos syndrome.
Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is a connective tissue disorder that affects the joints and sockets in your body.
At trial, other medical professionals, though, disagreed. There is no definitive test for children to determine if it's true. Either way, prosecutors argued it wouldn't explain Parker's injuries.
And sometimes good people do bad things. Sometimes they snap.
Our investigation, Help That Harms, isn't as much about a parent's guilt or innocence as it is the systemic roadblocks that make it tough for families to quickly get an independent second medical opinion and maintain a close relationship with their child without having to go deep into debt.
Can we fix this?
Our system is based on people having faith in the justice system. If we can do everything we can to make sure that we get the answer right, even for this small group of people, then people will have more faith and more confidence in the larger system.
Perhaps it's why these cases have started to garner national attention from groups like You Are the Power.
We help small organizations who have been harmed by an overreaching government.
We're going to do the 50-50 raffle.
State coordinator Ryan Ralston has helped organize fundraisers.
Some of these families are averaging $50,000 to $75,000 in legal fees.
And the group has launched social media campaigns to raise awareness about cases like the Alexanders.
Our ultimate goal is to make sure all the state officials are aware of what's going on. We want them to understand what is happening in Georgia.
You want some more bubbles, Parker?
Yes.
The boys call their grandma Lolly.
Here comes Lolly.
Like lollipop.
Grandparents are everything sweet.
Even when the situation...
That's what we're supposed to be. Everything sweet.
could leave you bitter.
This is a terrible situation to be in.
It really hurts. I just miss my family, miss my boys.
The accusations made by a child abuse pediatrician, often called a CAP, are at the heart of the decision to remove a child from their parents.
But we couldn't get any CAPs to talk with us. And the medical professionals that are willing to push back against a diagnosis of abuse wouldn't sit down for an interview either, afraid their words would be used against them in court. So that's exactly where we went. To court, where medical professionals couldn't dodge our cameras. The case, Daniel Smith. After more than 20 years in prison for killing his baby boy, he wants a new trial. He insists his son died from a brain injury at birth. Now, there are a few injuries that come up most often with these kinds of cases: retinal hemorrhages, bone fractures, metaphyseal lesions, and subdural hematomas. It's not important that you know what those terms mean, just that two doctors can look at the same x-rays, lab tests, and body scans and come up with very different conclusions about how they happened. Abuse to one doctor, maybe rickets, a blood or genetic disorder to another. Case in point.
My conclusion in the case after reading all of the records provided to me were that the child died from abusive head trauma.
Do you believe that Chandler died as a result of abusive head trauma?
No. I believe he died of anoxic brain injury.
Basically, a medical condition, not abuse. That means a decision on whether a parent goes to prison or loses custody depends on credibility. And perhaps it's why we found documents like this one, The Racket About Rickets, an 80-page presentation on how to discredit a defense witness.
I've been in the field for a long time. How many people do I know who know what I know? 100. Not one is willing to do this. Not one.
Dr. Michael LaPosada is the only doctor who agreed to talk with us for this story. He is the director of pathology at University of Texas Medical Branch
specializing in blood disorders.
The trouble is there's more than 100 different bleeding disorders named. And so what they do is they rule out a limited number, 5, 6, and say, that's it. We did all the tests.
In 1998, Dr. LaPosada saw firsthand how a misdiagnosis could put a parent in prison. Ever since, he has been analyzing cases free of charge and testifying for those he believes are innocent. He has his own slide presentation. It's called The Worst Misdiagnosis of All.
19 out of 20 kids with bruises were actually beaten. I have 3 kids, and I used to play this game with them. Joe, touch your nose, touch your nose, touch your nose, touch your chin. Oh, he touched his nose. I think that's the problem here, is that if it's abuse, 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 people don't stop to think for a minute, and there's no requirement for getting an expert like me, who signed out 50,000 bleeding and clotting patients, to say, is there an underlying disease? And then, even if there is, there's no requirement to believe me.
LaPosada works with a team of doctors from different specialties designed to challenge his diagnosis, not rubber stamp it. We have no idea if that's what happens at CHOA, since no one would agree to sit down and talk with us. But at this Gwinnett County hearing, child abuse pediatrician Suzanne Starling testified they are trained to look at all options.
Have you ever looked at a case where abuse was suspected or alleged and found that abuse did not occur?
That happens all the time, actually. About 40 to 50% of the time, we actually evaluate children that someone else has thought was abuse, and we don't think it's abuse.
In 5 years, medical professionals in Georgia contacted child welfare nearly 7,000 times for some type of suspected abuse involving an infant. But only 345 of those cases were physical abuse. Most of the time, child welfare pointed the finger at the parents. But we couldn't find any data on how many of those parents were like the Glenns, later found innocent and reunited. Smith says he's innocent too and wants a new trial to prove it. During the hearing, we saw images of eyes, brains, and bones, each expert trying to prove what an injury can and cannot say about the cause. It's why in this case, the defense even brought in someone to talk about the power of cognitive bias.
It can become problematic in situations where the goal is to establish the objective truth. Because by definition, if 2 individuals look at the same information and come away with 2 different interpretations, one of them must be factually incorrect.
Psychologist Jeff Kukuka studies the role of bias and how to prevent it. He testified a diagnosis by a child abuse pediatrician is different than most.
We rarely ever find out whether the child actually was abused or not. An expert could consistently diagnose a condition such as abusive head trauma, but there's no way to know whether those consistencies are accurate.
According to the National Registry on Exonerations, about 36 people have had their convictions related to child abuse overturned as our understanding of the science around these types of injuries has changed. It's why Mount Sinai pediatric neurosurgeon Sadi Gatan said doctors should alert child welfare to protect the baby, but gather more information before declaring the injuries abuse.
The minute that you posit in the chart that this is non-accidental trauma, then everybody believes it. And everybody does their best to get out of it as quickly as possible.
Gatan has published a report encouraging specialists to speak up when consulted on a case labeled abuse that may not actually be.
When there's an accusation of child abuse, get involved, because if you walk away, that's when people get hurt.
The judge has yet to say whether he will grant Smith a new trial. But parents argue before any case goes to court, they should be allowed an independent second medical opinion. There is one state that has made that right. A law will take you there as we investigate the help that harms. The stories always seem to start the same way. a concerning injury.
We noticed that he had a little bump on his abdomen,
which Holly Simonton says then leads to a trip to the hospital.
And literally within minutes of meeting me, there were basically outright accusations to my face.
Turns out, parents in Georgia aren't the only ones fighting to be heard, because we didn't find Holly in Atlanta. We found her here in Boyd, Texas, where parents have been lobbying lawmakers for years to get an independent second medical opinion before taking their children away. It's why we hit the road to learn more about SB 1578, a piece of legislation that for the past 3 years has meant hope for families in Texas who say they're falsely accused of abuse.
They're the first to admit they understand completely that an investigation was needed. We are wanting due process, we're wanting better checks and balances, and the truth should always be the most important goal here for everybody.
Simonton says that search for truth started with families willing to speak up.
This incident has broken our trust in the healthcare system.
Just months after their nightmare, in 2021, she found herself testifying at the Capitol.
I was terrified. I actually wanted to back out as we were traveling to Austin.
But she had seen the power of a second opinion.
So our pediatrician looked over Hudson, he was fine. And she's like, we're not putting him through all of that invasive abuse workup. And she was so fired up. And it meant the world to me, because without her, I don't know where we would be.
Because of that advocacy, the Simontons never lost custody. But other parents told lawmakers they weren't so lucky.
The CAF in our case never accepted our daughter's diagnoses, and even went so far as to use our family's case as an example of abuse at a national conference without our permission.
That it didn't matter what we said, that he only listened to the child abuse doctors.
How long was the child out of your?
It was almost 2 years. I missed my son's first birthday.
It was that kind of testimony that helped win legislative allies like Representative James Frank, the chair of the Human Services Committee. When you first started talking about this issue, did you find that lawmakers were educated on it, or was there skepticism?
I think there was a lot of skepticism.
Frank says that's why lawmakers raise concerns with hospitals and child abuse pediatricians, or CAPS, more than a year before this committee meeting, expecting they would, on their own, make changes.
So any specific changes in the last couple of years?
Not that I can pinpoint.
That's honest. That's good.
He had hoped those conversations would prompt hospitals to change their policies without the need for legislative action.
And I guess I am incredibly disappointed about the lack of process changes within the child abuse, the children's hospitals in this case. I don't have any kids that young anymore, but unless their life depended on it, I would not take them to one of these places. I mean, I think we can make it better as legislators, but until the culture changes, I don't think it's going to be fixed.
Texas has 23 child abuse pediatricians, and Representative Frank believes the state should reconsider their role.
There's a big difference between calling CPS and saying, look, we're seeing some things that are unusual here. You probably ought to check. Versus calling CPS and saying, I have found child abuse, and in some cases, and I know which parent's doing it.
Frank says Texas has tried to train caseworkers within the state's child welfare agency to use a CAPS information as an opinion, not the only opinion. But he knows that's hard when agency turnover leaves young caseworkers to make some pretty serious decisions. Almost 3 years after Texas tried to improve due process, Simonton says the law, as written, isn't enough.
A lot of parents don't even know they have the right to a second medical opinion. The CPS isn't going to tell them that, and the child abuse pediatricians aren't going to tell them that. So parents don't know they have that right.
Which is why in the next legislative session, she hopes Texas lawmakers will debate how to make the intent of the law clear and enforce it.
I think you've seen in Georgia, and certainly we've seen here, there's plenty of times where they have created harm. out of thin air when it just didn't need to be done.
Illinois is having similar discussions. Proposed legislation in that state mandates child abuse pediatricians identify themselves and their role, and it orders hospitals to provide parents with their child's complete medical record. As with Texas, those speaking out against the measure are primarily doctors and hospital staff.
I know when it comes to abuse, there's always the fear, what if we get it wrong?
I mean, that was my biggest fear.
Frank takes comfort that even though the number of children in the state continues to increase, child fatalities due to abuse and neglect have dropped. But the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services says there were 38 children who almost died due to abusive head trauma, also known as shaken baby syndrome. That number would include some of the families who say they are innocent, fighting to prove their child's injury is really connected to a bleeding or genetic disorder, trauma at birth, or seizure.
I don't know how anybody can look away from this, from what these families are going through.
Holly Simonton says after her experience, she created a Facebook group.
This was a shaken baby syndrome case.
To post the stories of parents who say they've been wrongly accused.
Are you finding in other states that parents are facing criminal charges the same way that they are in Georgia?
No. So Georgia cases are much more highly criminalized. In a lot of other states, the families go through the family court system, but it doesn't rise to the level of criminal charges. And the problem is when families get tied up in the criminal side of things, the cost goes up astronomically. And then those bond restrictions wears these families down.
Holly and her husband still get a bit nervous anytime their boys get injured. When Hudson broke his collarbone, her first thought was,
oh my goodness, thank God there are witnesses around. But we still panicked. Which hospital do we go to? We stopped in the parking lot and thought, are we putting our child in more danger by bringing them into this hospital?
Do you ever find that you have those moments where you read things like the Happy Mother's Day card and you think, I might not have had this gone a different way?
Yeah, all the time. Sorry. Yeah, I think I have survivor's guilt. We need the unaffected to come alongside of those of us who have been through it. I don't know how anybody can look away from this.
Hey y'all, and welcome. I'm your host, Colleen Puckett, and today with me is my husband, Derek Puckett.
Hello.
What's the name of your podcast?
The F Word Foster Care.
it's their story of why the state put their children in foster care.
And they told us that they were there because there had been some allegations made that I was starving our children, which was very ironic given that they showed up while I was cooking this ginormous home-cooked meal for my children.
And the last thing I can actually remember is looking up at the staircase. And my sister was there with my babies. And at that point, I just lost touch with reality because I couldn't function. I didn't know how to breathe.
Never once during our case did it feel like it was reunification. It was the whole time it just felt like you're never getting them back. Not family friendly at all.
No.
The Pucketts have lived the help that harms, the roadblocks created by our child welfare system that make it difficult for parents to prove their innocence after being accused of abuse. Even though the Pucketts had the resources to fight and get their children back, their family wears the scars.
I mean, my kids weren't going to be removed to begin with. But
what do you think changed?
I think the liaison at the hospital is what changed. It was child abuse pediatrician, liaison, and leadership from DFACS all talking, but not talking to the family and the children and the people, like the investigators who actually are working with us, who have contact with us, who have spoken to us and our children.
The child abuse pediatrician that determined your children were being starved, were not being properly fed. Did they meet your children?
No.
Did they meet you?
No.
After they were away for a year, did they gain a lot of weight?
No. They had the smallest amount of weight gain and growth in their entire lives that year. And they came home on all the same medications and then some, and with all the same diagnoses that they went into care with.
The Pucketts never faced criminal charges, and the girls have now been back home for 11 years.
There you go.
Pass the baby.
The family has since grown, and the experience has inspired a new job.
Being the first parent navigator in Georgia, where I'm able to now mentor parents who are in the system for all sorts of allegations and help them walk through the system to reunification.
It is a position created by the defense attorney that reunited her family. It is through that job.
Remember, watch your fingers, okay?
We met Stephen and Yasmin Glenn.
There we go.
This is outside time. Y'all keep riding.
Remember, don't go past the car.
This is when everybody gets home from school. When I get home from work, come outside while the day is still nice. We can sit out here, enjoy them playing, have small talk.
After being accused of abuse, it took more than 2 years for the Glenns to get their kids back.
843 days in the system. Like, we even had conversations of what does that mean for us if they don't come back? Or what is it going to look like if we have to keep going for a couple more years?
Mm-hmm.
And those were tough conversations to have.
The loss of their children snowballed into the loss of Stephen's job.
Working helps keep your mind off of things because you don't want to stew on it all day. So
Yeah.
you keep yourself busy, but when you can't work to keep yourself busy, you're stuck in an empty, quiet house.
I had a couple months where I didn't leave this house.
It's not healthy.
Yeah, I had groceries delivered. I would not go outside of this house. There was nothing for me outside of this house.
Both families echoed concerns that the child welfare caseworkers seemed to listen and care while talking privately. But by the time everyone got to court, something had changed.
We have case managers who will tell parents, I don't believe you did anything, but this is what I'm being told I have to do. That's frustrating on parents because they're being told one thing of we believe you, and then go into court and the testimony is we think you're an awful parent. And it's like two totally different, people basically.
There's no winning for these parents.
Attorney Doris Good, who represented both families, says the system moves quickly to permanently take children away from those who won't admit guilt. The argument is they've shown no remorse, and without that, the parents will never change.
It's a catch-22. If they can explain it, they'll say the explanation isn't sufficient to explain the injuries. If they can't explain it, then they'll say it's because it was abuse. From the moment they get in there, they're accused, and there's no way to essentially show their innocence.
Right?
But how or why would a parent admit to doing something they didn't do?
You did get it.
Yasmin remembers the day her attorney called with the news. Their juvenile court case was closed, all parental rights restored. And since they didn't face criminal charges, their children were coming home.
I just started crying, hyperventilating, crying.
They had not only been living in fear of losing Eli and Alana, at the time, Yasmin was also 6 months pregnant with Davina.
Eli, hey, you don't have to race, you know that?
Sibling feuds are now just as precious as family fun.
Got everybody here. It's a nice day to play outside. The whole family's together.
I feel grateful and blessed, honestly, and hot.
But appreciating what you have doesn't erase the impact of their separation.
I lost all self-confidence in myself. I no longer thought that I was worthy of my children. And I never thought that I could be a good parent again.
Even though you were never a bad parent.
And when you hear it so often, bad parent, awful parent, you start to believe it. I remember talking to my husband and saying, did I really do that? And he'd be like, no, you didn't. That was made up. And we've been playing Uno since they were itty bitty. So we didn't play for quite some time. Bam! So it's pretty awesome.
The Pucketts say their children were never victims until they went into foster care.
It's impacted them greatly. It impacts how you have relationships with others. It impacts anxiety.
We have no way to verify, but Colleen says she added up the time she saw her girls while they were in foster care. It totaled just 16 days.
Because of the case plan and the visitation schedule that they were willing to set up.
Yeah.
Wow.
And that was eye-opening to me on why it was hard for my children and I to connect when they came home.
Yeah.
It was because I didn't know who they were.
I mean, I just remember the first night we were like, are we allowed to let them go play in a room by themselves? Or are we supposed to be like right next to them all the time?
Should we let them explore or not?
The Pucketts talked with their girls before agreeing to talk with us. It was a family decision.
That's their story. It's not just mine, and it's not just my husband's. It's our story as a family.
Hi, I'm Diana Kramer.
I'm Carolyn Alexander. I'm Erica.
Most of these people have never met. They come from different backgrounds.
Yeah, I'm a business owner.
I used to work in a restaurant as a server and a manager.
I work for the city of Noonan.
I am an upholsterer.
I'm an electrician.
And I'm an advanced EMT.
Some can't hold a job because of the tragic twist that makes all of their differences disappear.
How many of you were accused of abuse after walking through the emergency room doors at Children's Healthcare? Just about everybody.
My son went unresponsive on August 11th of 2023, and he was life flighted to Choa Eggleston.
Bailey Collins and her husband were accused of shaking their baby, causing a brain bleed.
I lost it. I just lost it.
The reasons that brought these parents to Children's Healthcare vary.
I was actually sent to the emergency room by our pediatrician because I noticed a lump on her arm.
In our case, my daughter was 5 months old when we noticed some swelling on her leg.
Our whole situation was weight loss.
But once in the door,
They were immediately like taking my 2-week-old daughter's clothes off, checking her for bruises and all of this.
They ran an x-ray and they found a fracture in her leg. And I broke down immediately because I know my daughter has never fallen, had any accidents, anything. And I know I'm an extraordinary mother. They said they would run some tests. It still hasn't crossed my mind that they would ever even try to take her away. I just assumed we would figure it out.
Everyone was whispering about us. Like, I saw one of the nurses tap her friend and say, there they are. Like, there's the parents.
I trust them. I just want to tell them every single detail. They use that to arrest me and say that I'm abusing my baby.
And within hours of that accusation, for many of these families,
We were there for no more than 2 hours, and they separated us, questioned us, and then told us that they were taking our son from us, and we were immediately escorted out of the hospital by police. And that was the last time we saw him.
You haven't seen him since. And how long has that been?
3 years.
How many of you knew you were talking with a child abuse pediatrician when they were in the room asking you questions?
When we spoke to the child abuse pediatrician, we didn't know initially she was a CAP. We found this out later once we got our medical records.
I actually didn't find out until we went to court.
Same.
Well, he didn't meet us in person. He called us on the phone.
Well, parents understand and want doctors and DFACs to protect children. They question how much they truly want to find out what's going on.
I wanted to get more follow-up x-rays. We kept asking and pushing for more follow-up x-rays, and they wouldn't do it anymore.
Did they say why they wouldn't run those tests?
They just said there's nothing wrong, there's nothing wrong.
I came from Romania as an orphan. I was very tiny. Okay, maybe she got my genetics somehow. It was just like a slap to the face, like, no, we're not going to listen to you because you're wrong.
After I got custody of our grandson, I went to all kinds of doctors. And one of the first places was Emory Genetics. He refused. And he said, it's all right here in the computer. It's 100% abuse. I'm not doing any genetic testing. And I told him I was willing to pay for whatever. And he just flat refused.
Yes, I can attest to that too. You know, we've tried other options like Kaiser, Permanente, and as soon as they see what Showa has put in, it's like they don't even want to talk to you anymore. Their whole tone changes.
If you get a diagnosis, people don't believe it. The court system does not believe it.
Even if these families manage to get custody restored through juvenile court, many still have to fight criminal charges.
I'm facing a lot of charges right now for something I didn't do. I have 18 counts, 2 for each fracture. I'm facing 360 years in prison.
We won our juvenile court hearing, and the court ruled in our favor for my son to be returned home. But since we're out on bond, we cannot be alone with him, so he's still living with my parents.
For 10 months, Tucky Willowrat couldn't live or even talk to her husband.
I'm so lucky that I have friends who can pick me up from the jail and let me go home to them and sleep with them.
The time frame of first bringing your kid into the doctor to having them taken, less than 24 hours, and it takes almost 3 years to have them back home. How is that, a speedy trial? How is that allowable?
Who here has spent more than $25,000 trying to fight to get their kids back?
I even had to, sell everything out of my lawn care business, taking that kind of hit.
We're $100,000 into this. We have loans that we're paying back, and we're barely making it.
These families say they are living proof something needs to change. How many of you feel the primary motivator of the process is to truly protect kids from abuse?
Shame on you, and this is gonna stop.
Take off the blinders when certain things don't line up. Everything is just not, by the book.
I don't think that every case requires you to have to contact the police, because any investigation that defects would have done on their own no longer happens, because you're automatically guilty because police are involved.
I believe there should be a second opinion. I think that's what they've done in Illinois and Texas. Especially with our case, me and Terlin, our doctor was in training. She wasn't a child abuse pediatrician, yet she still tore up our lives.
Someone who's a child abuse pediatrician isn't a geneticist. They're not a pulmonologist. They're not endocrinologists. They're a child abuse pediatrician. Their specialty is abuse. Their specialty is not to look at other medical conditions.
Protect your kids, protect yourself, learn your rights.
You need a lawyer to take your kid to the hospital.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I won't go back.